begin our report with the conviction of President Biden's son, Hunter, on 3 felony gun charges. After only a few hours of deliberations, the Delaware jury found Hunter guilty on all counts. Prosecutors argued the younger Biden lied about his drug use when he filled out a form to buy a gun in October of 2018. In the proceedings, Hunter Biden saw his own family members compelled to testify about his admitted struggle with addiction. President Biden released a statement following his son's conviction. He said, in part, quote, "So many families who have had loved ones battle addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery." The president also reiterated that he would not pardon his son, saying he will respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Biden showed his support in person, changing his travel plans Tuesday afternoon in order to meet with Hunter in Delaware before leaving on an international trip to take care of the responsibilities of his day job. Hunter Biden's lawyers say they plan to, quote, vigorously pursue all the legal challenges available. Hunter Biden faces up to 25 years behind bars, although he is unlikely to be sentenced to the maximum penalty as a first-time offender. The date for his sentencing has not yet been set. CBS campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman has been in the courtroom in Wilmington. Katrina, what was it like in the courtroom as the verdict was read?
It was a very solemn feeling in that courtroom. Hunter Biden sat very composed, watching the jury as they filed in, and I noticed that none of the jurors seemed to look towards him. They were either looking ahead or looking down. Then the foreman read guilty on all 3 counts of these felony gun charges against Hunter Biden, and Hunter just nodded his head and patted his attorney, Abby Lowell, on the back. He hugged his attorneys afterwards and then found his wife, Melissa, and gave her a hug and a kiss. A couple members of his family were sitting behind him. As you mentioned, the verdict was actually quite fast. So Jill Biden tried to get into the courthouse in time, but she couldn't. She got caught at security downstairs. She did catch Hunter on the way out, and they left the court holding hands.
Katrina, you and the CBS News team that have been covering this in Wilmington were able to interview one of the jurors who asked to remain anonymous. Let's listen to what that juror said.
I can say the judicial system was very fair. Okay? We treated it just like we would any other case. It wasn't about Hunter Biden. It wasn't about his family. It wasn't politically motivated. It was what he did. And the biggest thing that he did was lied about not being a drug addict and not using cocaine and buying a gun.
And Katrina, what more did that juror tell you about the deliberations process?
It was very interesting to gain his insights into that jury room. For one, he said that they never spoke about the president during deliberation. That didn't factor in. They said that this wasn't about politics, and they really tried to treat Hunter like any other defendant. He said he was very much aware that the Biden family was sitting behind Hunter in the courtroom, but he tried not to even look at them so he could pay attention to the case after a while. But when they first went into the jury room on Monday evening, they took a tally, and it was split. 6 guilty, and 6 of the jurors were not yet ready to give a guilty verdict. But he said that they went over the evidence very thoroughly. They didn't want to rush judgment. They knew that Hunter's life was in their hands. And by this morning, 11 were voting guilty, and there was 1 juror who still was not fully convinced. But after they went over the evidence again, all 12 of them decided that Hunter was guilty and that the evidence was really just overwhelming. He said that they were not that impressed by the defense's case, that it seemed a little bit all over the place, and like they really didn't dispute a lot of what the prosecution had to say. They were mainly trying to say that Hunter wasn't an addict at the very moment that he bought that gun. Another thing he pointed to was how powerful it was to hear Hunter's own words in the courtroom, because while he did not testify, he recorded the audiobook of his memoir where he talks about his drug addiction and he talks about being an addict, and that also played into this decision.
And finally, Katrina, that's amazing detail, by the way. What are the next steps now in this case?
So as you mentioned, there will be a sentencing. The judge said typically it's in about 120 days, so she's going to let the parties know a specific date, but that puts it very close to the election and around Hunter's other upcoming trial, his tax trial in California. And before the sentencing, there are a series of steps. He'll have a pre-sentencing interview with a probation officer. They'll put together a report with a sentencing recommendation. The U.S. Attorney's Office will also submit a memo with their sentencing recommendation, and then the defendant will usually ask for leniency. An interesting thing, too, is that normally there are a lot of heart-wrenching letters submitted from family and friends. Given how much support Hunter Biden had just in that courtroom, we can only imagine the letters that may be submitted on his behalf. And typically, these aren't public, but there is a potential First Amendment argument to make them public for the press and for the people to be able to see these calls on his behalf.